My grandmother passed away 3 weeks ago. It still feels strange to say that out loud. Margaret Sullivan is gone. And with her, the last person who truly saw me is gone too. I knew the day would come when they'd read her will, but I never thought I'd feel so out of place. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been the extra piece in the family. My brother Daniel was the golden child, charismatic, ambitious, the pride of my parents. Me, invisible, the kind of person who walks into a room and no one even notices. But my grandmother always saw me. She used to say I had the purest heart in the family, that I noticed things others ignored. And more than anything, she always made it clear that she wanted her inheritance to be divided fairly. Not that I was expecting anything grand. I just wanted her to be heard. So when the lawyer opened that damn envelope and started reading, something inside me froze. My name wasn't there. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they skipped a page, overlooked a detail. But no, there wasn't a single line for me. The entire fortune went to Daniel. The silence in the room was suffocating. My father kept his eyes fixed on the table. My mother crossed her arms and leaned back like she already knew what was coming. And Daniel? Well, Daniel smiled. A small, satisfied smile that lasted only a second before he wiped it away, replacing it with the appropriate, neutral expression. I tried to argue, but the response was always the same. It was Grandma's wish. But I knew that was a lie. Margaret would never have done this to me. She always talked about fairness, about how Daniel already had every opportunity in the world while I needed a push. I walked out of the lawyer's office with my stomach in knots and my mind racing. If my grandmother truly wanted to split the inheritance fairly, then something happened to change that. Someone interfered. Someone erased my name. I tried to ignore it. I tried to move on. But something inside me refused to accept it. My grandmother would never have just erased me like that. And if no one else seemed to care, then I had to find out the truth on my own. The first place to look for answers was her house. My parents were too busy dealing with the inheritance paperwork to even notice me, and Margaret's mansion was still untouched. Climbing those stairs and opening her bedroom door gave me an eerie feeling. I searched through drawers, the closet, any place that might hold a clue. At the bottom of a dresser drawer, I found her phone. The battery was completely dead, but I knew that if I could turn it on, there might be something there. Something that could explain what really happened. As I headed downstairs, the muffled sound of voices in the living room made me stop. My parents were talking, their words quick and tense. I stood at the top of the stairs just listening. I couldn't catch everything, but a few phrases burned into my mind. Something about how there was no other choice and how she can't find out. They were talking about me. The certainty settled deep in my chest. My own parents had hidden something. Back home, I plugged my grandmother's phone into a charger. After a few minutes, the screen lit up, and with a tightness in my throat, I started searching. Almost all of her messages and call logs had been erased, but buried among the forgotten apps, there was a folder of voice recordings. The most recent one was dated just a few days before she died. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, shaky but steady. She spoke about the will, about how she had made a difficult but necessary decision. Then, a noise in the recording, like someone entering her room. Her voice dropped to a whisper, then suddenly cut off. The audio ended there. I stared at the screen. Something happened that night, something that stopped her from making sure her wishes were carried out. And now I was getting closer to finding out what. The recording wouldn't leave my head. My grandmother's voice carried a tone I had never heard before. Fear, but fear of who and why? I spent hours trying to recover the deleted data from her phone, searching for any clue that might help me piece together her last days. I managed to retrieve some call logs, but nothing too revealing. until I found one number that appeared multiple times in the week leading up to her death. It wasn't saved in her contacts. It was an unknown number, but there was something strange about it. The calls always came late at night. After a quick search, I discovered the number belonged to a lawyer my family had never mentioned. He wasn't the one who read the will. And, more than that, he specialized exclusively in contesting inheritances. The connection was obvious. Margaret had tried to do something before she died, and someone in my family made sure it didn't happen. The need to act consumed me. I returned to my grandmother's mansion in the middle of the night when I was sure no one would be there. If she really had tried to change the will, there had to be documents hidden somewhere. In her office, the pristine furniture contrasted with the silent disorder I had left on my last visit. But something felt off. The drawer where she usually kept important documents was empty. No folders, no papers. Someone had been here before me. Fear mixed with frustration. Every answer only raised more questions. If Margaret had tried to change the will, where were the documents? And more importantly, who made sure they disappeared? That's when I noticed a small glimmer under the desk, something reflecting the dim light from the lamp. I crouched down and ran my hand along the floor, feeling the rough texture of a crumpled piece of paper wedged between the baseboard and the wood. I carefully pulled it free, and as I unfolded it, my heart pounded. It was a torn-off corner of an official document, the edges burned as if someone had tried to destroy it. Through the soot stains, a few words were still legible. Amendment to Last Will. And just below that, part of my grandmother's name. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had destroyed evidence. My parents had lied. Daniel had lied. The original will had been changed, and my grandmother had tried to stop it, but someone made sure her voice was silenced. After finding the burned fragment of the document, my obsession became inevitable. I needed the full truth. I hired an expert to analyze the paper, and with meticulous work, he managed to recover more than I expected. The document was, in fact, a revision to my grandmother's will. And the most important detail? The name listed as the sole beneficiary of her fortune wasn't Daniel's. It was mine. I should have been in shock, but deep down, I always knew. Margaret would never have erased me like that. Someone did it for her. The question that haunted me was, how far had my family gone to make sure this will disappeared? I took the evidence to the unknown lawyer my grandmother had been contacting before she died. He stayed silent for a moment, then let out a heavy sigh. He told me Margaret had come to him weeks before her death, saying she suspected someone was trying to manipulate her. She wanted to make sure her wishes were honored. They had started the process of altering the will, but soon after, she was gone. Too fast. Too conveniently. That's when everything clicked. Margaret didn't die of natural causes. My own family took her life. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself I was seeing things that weren't there. But the pieces fit together too well. The sudden change in the will, the hidden lawyer, the burned documents, the strange behavior of my parents and Daniel. They had planned everything. I went to the police with what I had. I waited. I received threats. I was followed. But in the end, justice came, more brutally than I could have imagined. I don't know who cracked first, whether it was my parents or Daniel, but when the police applied pressure, they turned on each other. My brother claimed he only did what he did because he was influenced. My parents tried to downplay everything as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was there. The call records, the documents, the attempt to erase the original will. My grandmother's autopsy was re-examined, revealing substances that should never have been in her body. They were arrested, all of them, and I was left alone. I should feel victorious. In the end, my grandmother's fortune was mine. But when I looked at that wealth, all I saw were ruins. None of it was worth Margaret's life. None of it was worth what I lost.